back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello, and thank you all for staying tuned to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're talking with David Sereda. Before I bring David back on, don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com. David, before we went to break, and kind of just before you started talking about the crystals and working with stones, you were talking about using magnesium and potassium to change your electrolytes, increase your electrolytes. Excuse my little vagueness here, but I mean, how would that work? How would increasing your internal energy help protect you from radiation?
Well, what happens at the cell level, you have to think of the membrane, which is kind of like the linebackers in a football game, or the protection mechanism of the cell that decides what to let in and what not to let in. And the center of the cell is the DNA, which is our, genetic blueprint, which then tells the proteins, the RNA, to build proteins, which is the building blocks of life, from the various, amino acid complexes. And so then there are studies like Bruce Lipton's that say that the real brain of the cell, the brain is the membrane, not the DNA. The membrane is the real intelligence of the cell, because it's where if you expose the membrane to different environments or different consciousness, different thinking processes, then what the cell does is different. So you can have this intelligence going on at the membrane level. But the membrane basically is the buffer zone to either letting alpha radiation, which is, the first form of nuclear radiation, to come into the cell and get past that membrane line and get to the DNA and start mutating, or beta radiation, which is pure electron energy radiation, or more serious radiation like neutron radiation or X-ray or even gamma radiation. And things like tritium, which is, again I mentioned, is radioactive hydrogen. It bonds with blood and water in the body. It emits gamma in its process of radiation, and gamma, very, very weak gammas per unit, but enough to cause serious damage to DNA. That's why it's called a mutagen. But when a cell's electrical level, its electricity level, is low, more of that radiation gets in and does the damage. When the electricity levels of the cell are high, when its mitochondria is thriving with life, most of those harmful radiation levels don't get in. Now, of course, there are lethal levels that no human being, no matter how protected, if you were one of the nuclear power plant workers in Japan or you were living in the city of Fukushima, you may or may not get cancer. Now, remember, the people who were in the direct line of ground zero even of the blast in 1945 in Japan at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, some didn't get cancer. So the question is why? And the only thing scientists can find is at the cell level, there's some cells that are supercharged with energy that just don't seem to get as affected. There might be a few cancer cells, but they don't thrive very well because of this very high energy environment. So I've personally tested at trade shows over 800 people's body voltage, old, young, middle-aged, children, and I know from experience of body electric testing what different people are at. And I measure people at rest, not when they're active, to measure their rest levels. And I can see, on the millivolt scale, a wide spectrum of information. And people, for example, with fibromyalgia or clinical depression, nerve disorders, nerve diseases, had very low body voltage. I mean, critically low. You just couldn't get much voltage out of them, and certainly no current or amperage. I couldn't even get a microamp out of them. In fact, most people, I don't get any microamps, which is a millionth of an amp, and a millivolt is a thousandth of a volt. So you think of a light bulb. It's a 20-watt light bulb. Volts times amps equals watts. So that's the formula of energy burned, or energy being consumed, is volts times amps equals watts. So the body produces, you think of your toaster, you got electrons, which are like drops of water going down a river, pushing a paddle and turning a blender. Or if they turn fast enough, they can heat up a toaster. The body nervous system runs ions, and ions are way bigger than electrons. They're charged atoms, basically, and they move through the nervous system and produce volts and amps on a very weak scale. So we're very, very sensitive electrical systems, our bodies. And what happens is if a cell at the cell level is getting proper nutrients, especially specific electrolytes, its energy level will be higher. But I suddenly became interested in crystals because what are most of the electrolytes in our bodies that we ingest, like good sea salt, for example, is a good electrolyte. Good sea salt, I'm not purified. I'm talking about really good quality salt. Salt in water is a liquid crystal, essentially. And so why does salt, for example, you can take your Duracell battery. It has a copper and a zinc rod inside of your battery. And then it has a bunch of acid that stores the electricity. And the copper and the zinc allow current to flow out of the battery and light your light bulb. Well, your body is very similar. It has a lot of salt water in it. In fact, we're mostly water, but we need certain salts in our body to make us electric. If you take table salt and mix it in some water and put a copper and a zinc rod in there and attach some clips to your voltmeter, you got voltage. You might get 1/4 of a volt out of some pretty, lousy salt. Continuously. And if you get enough salt batteries together, you can light a light bulb. And if you get enough of them together, you can run a computer. So we're like batteries. And because most of the electrolyte family is liquid crystal, I became very interested in crystals. In fact, Konstantin Korokov, a Russian physicist who has appeared in many of my films like Quantum Communication and The Voice, he started photographing the auras of different gemstones and found that different gemstones had much brighter auras around them than other ones. And so I realized that, with my experience in nuclear fusion and knowing, theoretically and schematically how a fusion reactor works, I built these harmonic code mini fusion generators, and I programmed crystal pendants with harmonic information, deep harmonic information built on a whole new theory in mathematics and ratios that I discovered in the last 5 years. And we started measuring people's baseline voltage, and then people would connect with our pendants. And, all of a sudden the volts are going way up in the body. In fact, I was even getting microamps on people, a millionth of an amp. I was getting real amperage on people's bodies, whereas before there was none. So I was truly, and I had done this over 1,000 times with people in person. Some people I tested their voltage in person, some people I didn't. You would always see their energy go up, and different people responded to different stones. Some people, one particular stone would raise one person's voltage really high and not another, but then the other person, it was another stone. And you realize what these crystals are made of. They're solid state, what is known as solid state crystal. Now, where does solid state crystal come from? It goes all the way back to radios and transistors. In fact, this is an amazing story in comparison, because a lot of people think, crystals are hokey, they're new age. Well, sorry, people, your computer wouldn't be working, or your phone, or your radio transmitter without crystal. And the story goes that in mid-1940s, a guy named William Shockley in California had this vision to solve one of the biggest problems in electronics and long-distance phone calls and radios, and that is transmissions couldn't transmit very far. You couldn't hear a baseball game or the ballet or the news on the radio very far from the transmission tower without these big tube amplifier radios. And the tubes would heat up and blow, and then you couldn't hear it anymore. He started doing studies on crystals. In fact, there were a lot of early crystal physicists, serious university physicists in America And this whole revolution happened in America. American physicists were doing this. They started doing studies and finding that crystals, quartz, and germanium had so much power, so many electrons running around in there. If they could just get them to come out, they could create a crystal amplifier to amplify the very weak radio signal, and you get rid of all these bulky radio tubes and make miniaturized transistor radios. Well, it took this guy, William Shockley, John Bardeen, and William Bratton years of figuring out why they could see so much energy in the crystal, but they couldn't get it to come out. And I'm just astounded because we use electricity, alternating current electricity out of the wall at 60 cycles per second, and the human body pulses when it's resting at about 30 cycles a second. But our bodies pulse DC, direct current electricity. And these were working, and they couldn't get the energy of the crystal to come out. And finally, because they thought if they put a conductor, a metal wire, near the crystal, it was just a hair's breadth away, it was passing by, all these electrons jumping around in quartz would catch a ride on the train of the wire, and you would have all this extra power for nothing, electricity for nothing. It took them forever to finally stick the wire in the crystal and bounce it back out again. And the first transistor is a very simple, crude-looking device where the very thin gold foil wire comes in at an angle into the germanium crystal with a very, very fine breadth between the next wire coming out, and they got amplification. That little transistor ended up changing the entire world because it led to better and better transistors over the years. And finally, William Shockley and John Bardeen, they all won the Nobel Prize for this. They didn't make any money. Some of their partners formed a company called Intel, and Intel made computer chips with millions of transistors on a single chip today. They're little nano or billion scale size transistors. And that's why your computer has all those beautiful colors on it, all because of crystal. Germanium and quartz crystal wafers that what they had to do, they couldn't get natural quartz and natural germanium to increase energy. But there I was putting natural crystal, which I could measure a tiny increase on the human body. If I picked up a piece of quartz that had been sitting in the sun outside and plugged my fingers into it, I could see my body electricity go up a little bit. But when I vibrationally treated my crystals, and they chemically treated theirs, they used things like boron and phosphorus to dope purified germanium in thin wafers and get it to react with a conductor. What I did is we used silver, pure silver, beautiful windings, and made a beautiful piece of jewelry that is harmonically treated, and you plug your fingers into it, and your volts go way up, and even your microamps are actually visible on the meter. Then we did aura camera photography because we wanted to make sure the increase of energy wasn't stuck and localized to the pendant. It was in the body. And the aura camera photography using Konstantin Korokov's aura cameras was astounding. You see this woman before, her aura was really weak and not very and out of balance, and she connects to a simple bioharmonic transistor, my pendants, which are lightstreamtechnologies.com for people interested. And these little biotransformers were consistently raising energy. My wife, Crystal is her name, who suffers from fibromyalgia, had the lowest body voltage of almost any person I've tested. I've tested a few people lower than her. And ever since she's been wearing this thing, her body electricity levels are higher than the average person, beyond 30 millivolts a lot of the time on the skin, on the surface of the skin. And whereas the average person might be 5 instead of 30. So pain levels go way down. Why? This is, I'm not a doctor. And in fact, I got Harvard and other medical doctors who prescribe these things to their patients experimentally, because legally I cannot make a prescription because I'm not a doctor. I can only say that if you use common sense, any doctor can tell you if you raise the energy of the body, it will induce healing, theoretically. I have to say the word theoretically to protect myself. So why? Why does what I have as a solid-state crystal, why does it hold harmonic memory? Well, now, of course, the memory systems in computers, every little thing inside of a little radio, a little transistor radio, is made of crystal and metal. Crystal and metal. Detectors for radar are made of crystal and metal. Your Apple computer, the Intel chip in your laptop and your PC, it's all crystal and metal, crystal and metal. And then they eventually invented something called the integrated circuit, which is an entire circuit board printed on a crystal wafer. So for people who don't think crystals are anything, you really got to do your homework. And you got to understand why, if you ingest proper liquid crystals, your body volts will go up. Now, the difference between my pendants and taking, hundreds and many hundreds of dollars in supplements is what I found is, firstly, it takes you higher than the supplements will take you. But the supplements are important. You really need both of them. And that's one of the things I've been doing in my lab, is working on the ultimate formula for the ultimate electrolyte drink, and I'm just about finished. I haven't released it yet. So theoretically, people who have higher body voltage will suffer less from the effects of ionizing radiation. But there's one more factor, and the other factor, a Motorola physicist figured it out sitting right in front of me, why one kid gets leukemia and another doesn't living under the high-tension power lines. Is because if you have lead or mercury in your body because you've got it from a polluted water supply or food source, the radiation will ionize the mercury and the lead in your body and give off harmful ions, which is what your nervous system runs, a lead or mercury ion, and that can cause cancer. So with all that, I think there is a very positive, outlook of what people can do now to protect their bodies, from these onslaught from Fukushima that is still hitting us from radiation. Wow, I hardly let you talk, but now let's, because I feel like I finished the thesis of what the story is.
But it was good. I mean, it was just like boom, 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 totally informative. So that's why I just, kind of stepped back, because you always have so much information, so many facts that, that's why I love having you come on the show. Okay, so one of the things you talked about earlier was about consuming contaminated food, contaminated water. Everyone heard about the radioactive milk. Before the show, we were talking about like some of the produce in California and surrounding areas, or the fish coming out of Alaska. So people are potentially ingesting, these harmful particles. So wearing one of these pendants, or, when the drink comes out, will that also help ingested radiation as opposed to environmental radiation?
Well, that's a great question. Well, once the particles are lodged in your lung or your liver or your spleen, they're radiating 24/7. But if the cell's voltage in the body is high enough, I can't, guarantee you it's going to protect you 100%. But again, I have to say theoretically, that because you have higher voltage, you're going to be in better shape. But there are other things you can do, like heavy metal removal, which some people claim zeolite and other heavy metal removal programs. You want to get those particles out of you as soon as you can. You don't want them to stay in you. And because the government lied to us, and most of us don't know, in the western United States, front, and all the way up into British Columbia and Alaska, where there's, in Hawaii, forget about the grass in Hawaii and the milk in Hawaii is so radioactive. I have so many friends who left Sedona and moved there, and they think they're fine. And this is an interesting thing. So yes, to answer your question first, if you raise your body voltage by any means that is holistic, don't electrocute yourself. Don't attach your fingers to a 9-volt battery. It's too powerful. The body doesn't have 9 volts on the surface anywhere, not even on the brain. If you plug the voltmeter into your brain, it doesn't produce 9 volts on the skin. So 9 volts to the skin on a 9-volt battery is too how weak we are. We're very efficient systems. We We're biochemical electrical systems, and our very weak transmission system. I mean, even psychically, we've done tests with our pendants where, you think of a transistor. I bought this old Fairchild transistor, and I wanted to see if it would raise my body voltage, and it would. The transistor is why in the old transistor radios you could hear the news. You could hear the baseball game or the ballet really well. Without it, it was all scratchy with the tube radios. You just really had to fight, and then you lose the signal. You got to adjust the antenna on the roof for your radio, not even the TV set. And when the first TVs came out, it was the same problem. When the transistor came along, this little tiny guy, this little piece of crystal and metal with 3 wires coming out of it, I attached it to my fingers, and sure enough, it raised my body voltage. I did this the other day. Not as high as my pendants, but it did. And I wondered why these guys didn't understand that they couldn't get natural quartz to do this. They could see the energy inside the quartz, but they couldn't get it to react. But body electricity with quartz that's been vibrationally treated works wonders. Metal alone, I cannot get to work. I've had so many people with these rubber bracelets. I'm not going to name companies, but I've met them in person, and they were muscle testing people, and they're stronger. I really got to caution people. Muscle testing needs to be done by a kinesiologist, someone who's a professional at it. When you go to these trade shows and they sell you a rubber bracelet, they say raises your body energy. It's all hype. I mean, the voltmeter will not lie. If there's more energy in your body, it will show up on the voltmeter. And I've tested all those things, and they do not raise your body voltage. I can't see any body voltage increase on those things. You need crystal to do it, just like a transistor. Raises the current and the signal for radio transmission and reception. Your little cell phone has these crystal parts inside of it, and that's why it works so well. So the body, you think of it psychically, and you want to send out a message to the universe, and you think of yourself as a biotransmitter radio. That's what we are. We send out biophotons, or living photons of light that carry psychic information. And you wonder sometimes, just like the news, you can't hear it, why the universe or God can't hear you. It's kind of funny to me, because there's so many people broadcasting thoughts all day long, and you just, how does God know? I mean, who's sending a message? Can you hear me? And I was stuck on this airplane in L.A. a couple of years ago, pouring rain. There's 50 airplanes on the tarmac. None of them are taking off. So I plugged into my little crystal pendant that I built, and I vibrated this particular pendant with the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic and ran it through my 1-to-1.111 fusion generator, for lack of a better word. So it got heavily treated. And normally if I said the Lord's Prayer and said, can you move the clouds, we need to take off, nothing happens. And I figured that's because God couldn't hear me. Well, when I did it with my own little biotransistor pendant, within 5 minutes, the clouds cleared. We took off, and then it rained, and you could see everybody stuck on the runway down below. Then, because one time isn't good enough, we were going to land in Phoenix, and it was pouring rain in Phoenix. I mean, torrential. The pilot said we might have to land somewhere else. I did it again. I said, can we have a little clearing around Phoenix? I plugged my finger, so my body voltage was plugged into it. And a bubble formed around Phoenix. We landed. And when I drove out of Phoenix, it was pouring rain all the way to Sedona. So it worked. And I don't overuse it. I don't ask for everything like, God is my waiter. But whenever I need something, or ever I want to do a psychic, dialogue with, my masters, or I plug in. And I use this. And I really understand it now because I understand the transistor thoroughly. And I understand crystal oscillators thoroughly, and I understand where I can build future better ones that no one's even thought of yet, that are actually harmonic, because today's transistors are not built with harmonic dimensions. They're just a slab of crystal and germanium and layers of wire, positive, negative wire, like PNP, positive, negative, or N, negative, P, positive, negative, NPN, or PNP, for those techies out there. So anyway, those little transistors, you plug them into your body, they will raise your energy. But I just did mine a different way. I don't treat my crystal chemically like they do. I do mine harmonically. Big difference, whole other ballgame. And it works. So you think of yourself as
But if there are all
this,
crystals in the phone, if there are all crystals in your phone, we only have like 1 minute till we hit our last break. But what if I like open up the back of my phone and just like touch my phone? Wouldn't I like get positively charged as opposed to getting negative effects from it, from the crystals in that?
None of these systems are harmonically designed. They're just pumping radio waves in the microwave spectrum. They're putting information, the human voice, on a microwave, which is just higher frequency than a radio wave. So they're not harmonic. I mean, I have very advanced work I'm doing now on sending faster than light signals. But fast biological systems, scientists already know, send signals to each other faster than the speed of light, which is faster than your cell phone from here to the moon or here to Venus, much faster. A light wave travels around the Earth about 7-point-something times per second. So when you communicate on the radio spectrum, it's instant when you live on a small planet. But when you want to communicate with cosmic intelligence that may be hundreds of light years away, there's experiments I'm doing there that are very secret that involve a whole different type of crystal harmonic transmitter that doesn't work with radio waves, because biological systems don't use radio waves. They don't use microwaves. They use something else.
Hey, will you tell us all the secrets after the break?
Yeah.
Okay. I like secrets. All right. We're talking to David Sereda. His webpage for the crystal technology is lightstreamtechnologies.com, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages. And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and we're talking to David Sereda about Fukushima and radiation and what you can do to help yourself to not be affected by it. But, David, I have to ask, I have had this burning question that I have to ask before you tell us all your secrets, which I want to hear them all. Because I figure of anybody, you would have at least an opinion on this. There has been talk, of course, there's always the little conspiracy theory thing going on, that the tsunamis were actually caused by HAARP. Do you have any commentary on that?
Well, HAARP, again, it's using, it's an antenna array based in Alaska that beams a signal off of the Earth's ionosphere and then back down to the Earth. And I don't know if I believe that HAARP is causing it, because I've seen, in fact, just before Fukushima happened, there was a massive eruption on the sun, and 3 days before, it was so huge, not a regular eruption, and it wasn't even direct Earth facing, but it was so massive. Within that day, they had a 7.0, and within 3 days, it takes 3 days for the plasma wave from the sun to hit the Earth, or the shock wave. And even if a massive eruption happens on the backside of the sun, it can kick out an alternate shock wave on the front side of the sun if it's big enough. And whenever I've seen these, in fact, just before this giant tsunami of 2004, there was a massive eruption on the sun, and only 20 minutes later the tsunami happened. And the same with Japan. So because that data is there, and then someone said HAARP did it, unless HAARP knows how to trigger the sun to produce one of these, massive eruptions, then I don't believe it. I think it can manipulate weather, but triggering earthquakes, no. It's, again, the human body is a very, very weak electrical system, and the Earth's magnetic field is ultra weak. It's it produces not even a half a Gauss on the surface. To give you an example, some of the little magnets you can buy nowadays are so strong on their surface, they're over 1,000 Gauss. And for a magnetic field beyond the surface of a material to even reach 2 or 3 Gauss is phenomenal. And that's how sensitive the Earth's magnetic field is. So because it's so weak like the body, it might respond to very weak impulses if their information is correct. And therefore, HAARP may be able to do something. But I always see these things happen on the sun before the massive earthquakes. So I'm not a big believer in that.
Okay, but I think that's a pretty good. You don't hear about sunspots. I mean, some people maybe talk about it, but related to this and like related to the tsunami that they had in Indonesia, you didn't hear about any sunspots. You just heard HAARP, HAARP, HAARP.
Well, it doesn't mean I'm right either. There could be things about HAARP that I just don't know. I mean, I don't have access to their data. You really have to look at the capabilities. I read, when I was a defense contractor in bomb detection and nuclear fusion, I read everything I had access to in HAARP, but there was nothing there that made me believe that. But if you do experiments, experiments always, tell the truth. If you can, because by the time a radio signal bounces off the ionosphere back down to the Earth, it's traveled, several thousand miles. The strength of the signal has fallen dramatically from how powerful it was when it left the station. But I don't know. I mean, Tesla did amazing things where he could cause an earthquake to happen in a single building with a device the size of your hand. It tapped resonances into a little hammer, and the second the resonance returned to the device, it tapped it again, and it kept multiplying the size of the wave, and this little device could take down a whole building. In fact, that happened in China recently. People came running out of a skyscraper and because there was an earthquake, but there was no earthquake. It was only the building that experienced the earthquake. That happened in China recently. So someone might have figured out what Tesla did. I mean, so I could be wrong about HAARP, but it's just because the sun is always pointing there.
Okay. I just wanted to hear your take on it, All right. So tell us all your secrets.
Well,
None of the listeners will tell any of their friends. I promise.
See, for the people who, again, don't believe in crystals, think it's all hokey baloney, and, they don't know what's inside their computer and their cell phone, you have to understand how, at Stanford University, this was done in the 90s, they're saying that crystals will be the hard drives of the future because they have more memory than per volume of crystal than today's hard drives. Crystals are used everywhere in electronics. That nothing would work without them. Now, your body is a liquid crystal. A solid crystal is like a piece of quartz, or solid-state electronics used in computers and radios are purified quartz or germanium or other crystal that have been doped with certain chemicals or minerals on the surface to activate them, to cause them to work. So because crystal goes from liquid to solid doesn't mean that it doesn't have the same properties. If you take distilled water and try to run a 9-volt battery through the distilled water, you get a really weak signal. But if you put a bunch of salts in the water and attach it to a 9-volt battery and a copper and a zinc, pole, your anode and your cathode, your positive and negative pole, the water will fizz. It will fizz with a 9-volt battery. I've done this. So what it means is that's what we're made out of. And if you don't get enough minerals and you don't get enough salts, your electricity levels are going to be really low. But the most interesting part of the electricity of the body and how we store it in our biosalt solutions is not the energy levels, which you can see in a voltmeter, it's the information. Quantum physicists have found that information tells energy systems what to do. It was previously thought in medicine that energy is the ruler of the body, so you need energy in a particular organ to heal it. Well, that's true, except there's something bigger than energy, and that's information. And information is basically so sophisticated, we know so little about it, that no one who builds electronics is working in organizing it in an information structure itself. You can put information and send information through these structures, but we don't know how to send information faster than the speed of light. Why do little biological systems, in fact, this is a discovery by, French physicist Alain Aspect, that if you take an electron and a positron, which is an electron spins counterclockwise and a positron spins clockwise, and you separate them at any distance, they communicate with each other faster than light. Why? Why do plants do it? Why does the mother and a baby through what Einstein called action at a distance, why do biological systems send signals faster than light? Well, there are people like William Tiller who believe this transmission at Stanford, William Tiller at Stanford, who is a materials scientist, by the way, and a materials scientist at Stanford is very significant. William Tiller was in What the Bleep Do We Know? He's in my film Quantum Communication. Brilliant man.
He's an awesome guy.
Awesome guy. His work is so deep and so thorough. I'm amazed that the mainstream media believes they have a monopoly on who represents discoveries in physics and science, because William Tiller, with a PhD at Stanford and over 30 years of solid data collecting and research, has proven the transmission and reception of the psychic force. He believes what he calls subtle energy is beyond the gamma ray spectrum, so it's higher in frequency than gamma rays. Now, that's for anybody who knows a little bit of physics, that's an enormous statement, because energy in frequency, the frequency of energy, when it interacts with matter, and that includes crystal, it transfers its energy, which is non-physical, back into a physical state. And the higher the frequency of energy, such as gamma rays are, the highest frequency we know of, when they interact with matter, they produce the most powerful effects. So a 10-second gamma ray burst from a distant star could utterly destroy the solar system if it was disharmonic, utterly destroy the whole thing in a blink of an eye. So if consciousness is higher in frequency than that, then it has way more power than the greatest power we can see. We can't really see gamma rays. They're too high in frequency, but we can see their effects. We can see their effects when they interact with matter, so that's why we know how powerful they are. But if what Tiller is saying is thought is higher in vibration than that, why is it that when we think something, it's not that powerful? Well, it's because we transmit information from our liquid crystal self, one, and most of our liquid crystal bodies are not that organized. We don't, we stripped our rivers and our streams out of all the gold and all the silver and all the good metals and all the good crystals, so there's nothing left in them. When a lightning bolt strikes a mountain in the pouring rain, all those metals ionize and give off ions into the water, and we would drink that water. Why is it that certain yogis like Nityananda, who describes this place in India where all these yogis would come to meditate, and Ganesh Puri, what is now called Ganesh Puri, and they would get powers like Sai Baba to manifest gold bracelets right out of thin air. And I was wondering what it is, why did he always tell the students to bathe in the hot springs there? Well, obviously, the very, very sacred mountains they're not mined, they're not stripped of all their original pure minerals and things like emerald and ruby that are sitting in the mountains. In fact, some of the highest Ayurvedic medicine teachers in India say that powdered gemstones are the highest medicine, higher than all of the best plants. Why? Because it's crystal, and when you powder it and you ingest it in the body, you add it to your liquid crystal base that you are. And therefore, like Konstantin Korotkov found, the auras of some of these different crystals are all different. Some are really powerful, and some are not. Some of the highest quality gemstones you would think would be super powerful auras were not in his test. So anyway, with that understanding, you realize that in the West, because we've stripped everything, we drink bottled water, hardly anybody drinks good spring water anymore, and a lot of the good springs, all the local streams have been mined of all the gold. So we don't get the the gold and the minerals combined. We don't get the silver, gold, and all copper and all the good conductor and the zinc metals with the salts. The salts alone are useless without the metals. So I believe some of these yogis got these powers is some of these water supplies, like the spring at Lourdes, France. I believe if a chemist were to study the water at Lourdes, France, and the harmony and the structure and the information, they would find it super water. In fact, they have, and found that it is. So what you ingest is part of it. It's part of the formula. Practicing the meditation every day, like I've done for 32 years, is the other part. It won't work if you just get all the best food in your body and you're just going to get enlightened. It doesn't happen that easily. But years and years of ingesting good salts and minerals and bathing in waters like that with meditation will do absolute wonders to your state of consciousness. So my pendants, we can extract things like Brazilian blue quartz out of Brazil, and for some reason the Brazilian blue quartz and the purple lepidolite produce the highest voltages on people I've ever seen. And I'm only raising people's millivolts. I'm not electrocuting anybody. There's no electricity in my pendants. You can attach a voltmeter to them. On their own, they're nothing. But like the transistor, I use silver to touch in these harmonic toroidal windings that are really beautiful. That you need the metal conductor to touch the crystal to get the setup, and then you harmonically treat it, and it turns into a super biotransistor. But now I'm so convinced that you can take one of the old transistors, although they're really tiny, and plug it into yourself. Now, those don't have harmonic information like mine do, but they will raise your energy. They will amplify you. And that's what the first transistors were called. They're amplifiers. They're crystal amplifiers. And so crystal can amplify your body. Again, you can, if people want these, just write David Sereda, Sereda, @hotmail.com, and I'll send you a little ebook all about them in a catalog, because we don't have them for sale on a website per se. You have to get these through me or one of my staff. So if you want to experiment with one of them. But that's, my research is going from there to my big stuff is faster than light communications, and studying why, plants and living systems can communicate faster than light, because the implications of that are, SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, has utterly failed at finding an intelligent signal from outer space, and that's because anybody who's that far away, like the Pleiades, 144 light years away, they can't send you a signal fast enough. But what I did in my film Quantum Communication, I took William Tiller's formula for all the different chakras in the body and how fast, if that chakra is coherent, meditative, coherent, harmonized, how fast it will transmit information. By the time you get to the crown chakra harmonized, you reach real enlightenment levels. You can communicate with the Pleiades in less than a quarter of a second. Actually, the heart communicates in less than a quarter of a second with the Pleiades. By the time you get to the crown chakra, it's a fraction of a second. And that's amazing, because it means inside of our own liquid crystal selves, we have the chemistry, and more important than the chemistry and the voltage, we have the consciousness to communicate with different star systems. So when people are sharing psychic experiences that they're getting in their dreams of a Pleiadian being coming to them, this is no laughing matter. This is something that needs to be looked at, because when you understand how a television set works, why there's a picture on the television set is very similar to the reason there's a picture in your consciousness of a being you've never heard of before who's telling you they're from the Pleiades and they got a message. It works the same way. An LCD, is a liquid crystal display, or, a light-emitting diode, same thing. That's how these things work. The information is the structure of the picture. So if information is messed up, you're not going to have anything on your screen. But the consciousness of your brain is far more advanced than your computer, far more valuable. Now, some people say to me, well, I can buy a brand new iPhone for the same price as your pendant. And I said, well, yeah, but these pendants are pure silver. They're handmade. They're all handmade, brand new electronics. And what do you want to do? Do you want to talk on your phone, or do you want to be one of the few people who wants to raise their body energy and increase their own psychic potential? It's up to you. What's more important to you? I have an iPad here with all my favorite music on it. Great. That's great. We have pendants that are $100, and we have some that are $300. Some are $450. And now we have these malas with these really high-end gemstones that are over $1,000. Some of them. So there's something there for everybody. Now I've tested diamonds too.
Let me ask you a question, because I know what the answer is already, but have you and Crystal tried playing with the pendants and used them to improve your guys' communication with each other? Oh,
we have. I can't even tell you the experiences I've had, with my wife and my baby. I've literally seen with my eyes open my wife floating out of body in this beautiful gold and white gown with flowing hair, and the moment she floats into her body, her face twitches and she rolls over. My wife and I have seen each other in our dreams and described the dream to each other when we woke up over tea, and we were both in the same place and getting different aspects of information about some cosmic event. This is really trippy. One time my wife was stuck in a dream calling to me for help. I heard her audibly say, "David, David," and I woke up and my wife's asleep, and I thought, how could I have heard her? She's not even awake. And she's not talking in her sleep because I'm looking at her lips, not moving, and she's still saying my name. I can hear it in the room. I can hear my wife like a radio, and she's in a dream calling out my name. And a lot of those things, ever since we've been working with technology, have multiplied and multiplied. Now that doesn't happen every night, those things, but they happen, more frequently. So it's very exciting stuff. I've been meditating for 33 years. I'm a person who could tell you don't need anything. If you meditate deep enough, you don't need a single tool. But why did so many ancient shamans, why do you see, like in my ebook on the pendants, the ancient Sumerians wore these toroidal wound pendants on their wrists, on both wrists? Why did the god Marduk wear, 10 of them around his neck? They have the same type of windings as ours do. Why did he do that?
Well, it also makes me think of the pyramids. That's all crystal on the inside.
Exactly, and it's layered. The core is pink quartz, and the outside is limestone, and that's because you have to produce layers to produce differentials. Like a battery won't work with 2 copper rods stuck in it. You have to have copper and zinc, or copper and some other metal. You have to have alternate metals for your positive and negative poles to produce a differential to cause current to flow. So the pyramid works the same way. In fact, the mathematics I've done on the Great Pyramid show the differential from the top of the uneven sides on all 4 sides. If you do the ratio math on it, it's the same ratio as the Earth's circumference pole to pole versus equator to equator. I announced that years ago on Coast to Coast AM that I had made that discovery. So that's harmonic ratios built into a giant crystal oscillator. All you have to do is ionize it with lightning or some other form of electricity to activate it and to get it to transmit. Now, guys like Wayne Herschel, somebody you should really have on your show, figured out all these pyramid complexes all over the world from above, showed Orion's belt, yes, the main 3 pyramids, but if you go deeper down the Nile, you'll see the Pleiades. You'll see the Pleiades in Mexico. You'll see the Pleiades in Japan. You'll see the Pleiades in Tikal. You'll see the ratio of stone pyramids in the ratio of the Pleiades everywhere on the planet. And when you ionize giant crystal oscillators, transistors, on that scale, in that ratio, you're going to communicate faster than light with that star system. I've already done it. I've already talked to that star system. We got answers.
Well, and there are a lot of people that really, like Barbara Hand Clow, as an example, does a lot of dialoguing with beings from the Pleiades. And so, I mean, there's a lot of information that's coming to the planet from the Pleiades, which I kind of trust their information. There are people that channel the Sirians, which I don't necessarily trust them so much. But, I mean, there's a lot of information coming through, and I think it's just very cool that the technology you're developing is going to help people to tap into that better and easier.
Well, Rita, we even have a Palladian transmitter here that we successfully proved to ourselves that we were sending messages to them, because every time we did it, we got an answer back. But we can harmonically treat a blue quartz stone with that harmonic value of that star system of the Pleiades for people who want it. And because there are many people who want to talk to that star group. In fact, when my wife was giving birth, we had both wore our blue quartz pendants that were treated with the Palladian harmonic code, and nobody has them. We've never had anybody else experiment with them, but we have them available, and just putting it out there now because I just thought of it. That when I saw the UFO in Berkeley in 1968 when I was 7 years old, the next following nights they appeared to me, paralyzed me. They were not grays. They were totally humanoid looking, but their energy fields were so powerful, and they told me they were from that star system. So, and they showed me how the craft worked, at 7 years old. Didn't understand it at the time.
And that was before, anybody even heard of the Pleiades.
Nobody heard of it. This is 1960. I had never heard of the word UFO at that age. I just watched My Favorite Martian and Star Trek. I didn't know what to relate it to at that age. I didn't know what ufology was at 7 years old. Nobody told my mom, my dad. I saw the spaceship, and there were crowds of people on the street in Berkeley looking up at it. And that's where they were from. So I've always had the experience of them. When I played hide-and-go-seek in San Francisco in the middle of the night, I would look at the stars, and I didn't even know that was the Pleiades. I just locked on to them, the diamond cluster, and would count to 100 while my friends hid. I did it for years, and eventually it all came together. I understood it. But Wayne Herschel is the guy that, he doesn't know why the pyramids are all in the ratio of the Pleiades and Orion's belt. He just knows that they are. I take that data and go, well, do you know how a transistor works? It has layers of crystal metal. And the pyramids have layers of different types of crystal and metal when they had the gold capstone on the top. And as soon as you add conductor to crystal, it changes.
There's the music, which means our time is totally up. David, give out your website again.
You can get my pendants at lightstreamtechnologies.com or write crystallightstream@hotmail.com for a catalog, or David Sereda @hotmail.com. My films are at voiceentertainment.net.
Great. And I will post this other URL on the webpage. I didn't have that, but I will be happy to put it there.
Oh,
but
great.
David,
thank
you so much for coming on the show. Always love having you on. You always have too much information.
Too much, yeah, thank you.
All right, David, I will talk to you again soon. Kiss the baby for me.
I will.
All right, bye-bye. And next week, we're going to be having Stan Freeman and Kathleen Morrison coming on talking about UFOs and aliens, exposed, uncovered, and declassified.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to contact Dr. Rita.